What lives in the mountains? There are silences, and then there is the silence of the Sierra before it breaks. It isn't empty. It is a pregnant silence, dense like the air before a storm, full of listening ears and waiting eyes. I grew up learning its language. The ranch wasn't just my home, it was the center of my universe, a fixed point on a map of Sinaloa that mattered to most people as little as a speck of dust. My parents built it, my 9 siblings and I grew up on it like trees, twisted but strong, and when they all left, some for the city, others for the grave, I stayed. I was the anchor that kept the place from becoming just another ghost. By my mid-30s, solitude had become a second skin, comfortable and familiar. Routine was my litany. The morning coffee, thick and bitter as the sun bled over the peaks. The work with the cattle, a wordless dialogue, and the care of the house, a tribute to my mother. My 2 German shepherds, Sombra and Ceniza, Shadow and Ash, were my only conversation and their loyalty my only certainty. Life was good, anchored in a reality as solid as the wood of the fence. A reality I decided to disturb one Tuesday afternoon. It was an impulse, nothing more. An echo of my father in my head, the nostalgia for big game hunting. Let's go deeper, his memory seemed to tell me, where the land has yet to know man. I left Shadow and Ash on the porch. Their eyes followed me with an unease I didn't know how to read then, and went into the Sierra. My old Winchester rifle, polished by my father's hands before mine, felt like an extension of my arm. Normality unraveled slowly without a sound. The first thing was the stillness. There were no birds. The buzz of insects had died out. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then the animals, waves of mice and small rodents crossing my path, fleeing not from me, but from something coming up behind them. That's when I saw the tracks, and the solid universe beneath my feet cracked. They weren't from a single animal. They were from several, it seemed, and they were imprinted with a brutal force on the dry earth. They looked like coyote tracks, yes, but larger, deeper. And the worst part, the thing that stopped the blood in my veins, was the pattern. They weren't going anywhere. They formed overlapping circles, again and again and again, as if a pack of demons had been performing some crazed dance in that clearing. A cold that didn't come from the air ran down the back of my neck. The sun was sinking, and for the first time in my life, the approaching darkness didn't feel like an old friend. I set up camp out of pure inertia, an automaton executing learned movements. The moon rose, a disk of pale bone in an ink-black sky, watching with cosmic indifference. The fire crackled, a small, brave wound of light in a devouring immensity. And then, from the depths of that immensity came the howl. It wasn't the lonely lament of a coyote. It was a cacophony, an overlapping of dozens of howls, one on top of the other, high and low, mournful and fierce, all of them emanating from the same point, from the same throat. It was the sound of a pack contained within a single being. My hunter's instinct, stupid and blind, took over. I turned off my flashlight, trusting my eyes, and moved toward the sound, the Winchester tight against my shoulder. The smell hit me like a fist. A sweet, nauseating stench of old meat, of a disturbed grave. It led me to a tree whose bark was stained with a wet blackness. Dried blood. And at its feet lay a coyote, or what was left of it. Its body was shattered, as if it had been slammed against the trunk until it burst. But the most grotesque part was its torso. The skin and flesh had been torn off in a single piece, revealing the clean, white cage of its ribs. It was an act of such methodical cruelty that it could not belong to nature. A rustle of dry leaves behind me. I dropped to one knee, heart hammering against my ribs, becoming just another shadow. Footsteps. Heavy dragging. Accompanied by a wet, deep breath. And that smell, oh God, that smell of walking death. The moon slipped between the branches and illuminated it. My mind refused to process it. It was not an animal. It was an anatomical blasphemy. It stood on 4 long, arthritic limbs, with joints that bent at impossible angles. Its torso was a scaffold of enormous bones covered in shreds of a blackish, suppurating skin. I could count every rib and every vertebra of its spine, which arched like a cat's about to pounce. The head was vaguely canine, but deformed, with a snout that was too long and jaws that, when opened slightly to breathe, revealed rows of fangs like bone needles. And from those jaws spilled the stench. It would have stood if it rose up nearly 10 feet tall. I raised the rifle. The sight found the center of that monstrous head. My finger tightened on the trigger. And in that instant, without a single prior movement, its head swiveled 90 degrees on a neck that audibly cracked. 2 points of phosphorescent yellow, 2 embers of pure malice, locked onto me. It had seen me in the total darkness. It knew I was there. Paralysis seized me. I watched as, with a fluidity that betrayed its size and its state of decay, it launched itself onto its hind legs. It didn't run. It leaped. It covered 30 yards in a single, impossible bound and vanished into the blackness, leaving behind a trail of its laughter, which was the same polyphonic howl I had heard before. I returned to my camp, trembling, stumbling. The fire was still burning, my small island of sanity. But just before I reached the circle of light, a voice whispered from the trees to my right, as clear as if the man were standing beside me. A deep voice, devoid of emotion. "Get out." I stopped dead. The words hung in the air, vibrating. 5 seconds of silence. "Get out." I ran the last few yards to the fire, tripping, falling to my knees beside the flames. My mind, desperate, sought refuge in logic. A sick bear. A cougar with mange. The voice just the wind. Was. Sweet, cowardly lies. I sat there for an hour, the barrel of the rifle hot in my hands, waiting. Nothing. The silence returned, but now it was different. Now it was listening. Exhausted, I got into my tent. Sleep, far from being an escape, was a surrender. I woke to a liquid and absolute darkness. The fire had died. And the silence was so deep that the sound of my own blood pumping in my ears was a roar. Then the whisper. Outside. A voice. "Son." My soul froze. "Son, come, please." It was him. It was my father's voice. The same cadence, the same timbre worn down by years and tobacco. But something was terribly wrong. Each word sounded separate, as if a parrot were reciting something it didn't understand, a mechanical imitation, without the soul behind it. Footsteps began to circle the tent. Slow, deliberate. The sound wasn't human. They were the creature's footfalls. "Who's there?" I managed to croak, my voice broken by terror. The answer was a laugh. Low, guttural, a gurgle that seemed to come from the bottom of a well filled with mud and bones. In that moment, my father's stories about demons of the Sierra stopped being bedtime tales and became my reality. Desperate, blind with panic, I raised the rifle and fired through the canvas. The blast was deafening, and the laughter grew louder, clearer, delighting in my helplessness. The footsteps moved away, and then, a dull thud against the tent fabric right at the level of my face. A heavy bundle fell to the ground. The stench flooded in, forcing me to open the zipper. In the pale moonlight, I saw it. The coyote's severed head. Skin. Its milky, dead eyes stared at me. A trophy. A message. I abandoned everything. I grabbed the rifle, the canteen, and I ran. I ran without looking back, with the feeling of its yellow eyes fixed on my neck, with its grotesque laughter echoing in my ears. Dawn found me arriving at the ranch on the verge of collapse. Shadow and Ash whimpered as they met me, their fur on end. I collapsed into my own bed and fell into a feverish, restless sleep. But it hadn't followed me just to let me go. 3 days passed. 3 days of false calm, in which I tried to convince myself it had all been a hallucination. I was in the kitchen, the coffee cup trembling in my hand, when the pounding began on the front door. This wasn't the knock of a visitor. These were frantic, violent blows, as if someone were trying to punch the door down. I grabbed the shotgun I always kept by the pantry. My dogs, instead of barking, were huddled under the table, trembling silently. "Who is it?" I shouted, trying to make my voice sound firm. The pounding intensified, the wood groaning. "Get out of here. I have a gun." I yelled, the metallic chunk of me loading the shotgun echoing in the kitchen. The pounding stopped immediately. A dense silence fell over the house. And then the voice. The same robotic, dead imitation. "It's me, son. It's your father. Open up." My knees gave out. I fell to the floor, the breath trapped in my chest. I crawled to an armchair, using its back to pull myself to my feet. "Son," the voice repeated, closer now, just on the other side of the wood. "Open up. I'm cold." I heard footsteps on the porch. Not from 2 feet, but from 4. The same heavy, dragging walk I'd heard in the forest. It was pacing back and forth in front of my door like a caged beast. And then the laugh. The same bottomless well laugh. And the footsteps moved away, returning to the brush. The next morning, I found my dogs hidden under the truck, refusing to come out. That same day, I called my brother. I packed him a lie about a broken pipe and asked for asylum. I took the dogs with me. I haven't slept at the ranch since. It's still there, an empty shell of what it once was. Sometimes I go during the day with my brothers, just to make sure the roof hasn't caved in. But the place is tainted. We all feel it. It's a feeling of being watched by something very old and very patient, waiting in the darkness. This is my story, and it is a warning. There are places on the map that should remain blank. And there are voices that should never, under any circumstances, be answered. Especially if they're inviting you to open the door to your own home.